Hello and welcome to the dungeons. Dayman here. Today we're talking about our hazards. These are new challenges presented to us adventurers, and these new challenges got a whole lot more new. The update presented a new leveling system based around these hazard dungeons, which caused me to re-record this content so as to have the best information for you. So let's get into it. What are our hazards? Well, you have specific weapon hazards such as axes only, daggers only, bows only, and randomized weapons. Now, all those speak for themselves, but here are important notes. Even if you don't have those weapon models, they will be provided to you randomly, not based off of your kit. Random weapons dungeons specifically will offer you only 2 weapons, not a full 3 loadout. So, whenever you get into the dungeon, make sure you click down those joysticks while holding the weapons and look at your wrist so as to know what your elements and your damage and perks are. We also have additional boss battles, mini boss battles and regular boss battles, based off of the tier that you run that dungeon in. The more frequent those boss battles will occur. Those can be denoted by the small bumps or the large spikes, being mini bosses and big bosses respectively. Now, when it comes to your swarms dungeons, those will be based off of your biome, and we'll talk about those more specifically. And the death spawn. This means death is on your tail from the rip, so be prepared and don't suspect to be finding any death whistle along the way. Additional damage dungeons range from 150% more damage to 200% more damage. Now the fireball staff, this is a very interesting one because unlike a standard staff, it will go on to a cooldown, meaning you will not need power gems for that dungeon. Now when it comes to no potions, don't worry, if you have potions in your loadout and you load into that dungeon, it will be dropped onto your shelf when you enter the dungeon. However, if you already have more potions that exist on your shelf, unfortunately that will be wasted gold. So make sure you're communicating those no potions dungeons to your allies, as that's happened to me a few times. Waste a few hundred gold only to have them disappear. No revive. Now, it's important to understand how no revive works. Obviously you can't drop a potion on someone, nor can you use the resurrection hold down, but the way in which you get revived is by clearing out dungeon rooms, and even environmental death will count towards a permadeath. So don't rely on environmental deaths as a get out of jail free card. However, if you have gone down on a no revive dungeon, you are near a spike ledge, for some reason you can still walk off that ledge and be respawned. So that's one way of self-revive in those difficult dungeons. Mind you, if you're running dungeons solo, a no revive dungeon is just like running no houses at all. Now, half potions. Half potion dungeons are pretty interesting. What this means is that any potions that have a duration will have that duration shortened. So your quad potion doesn't become a double damage potion. No, it just means you have quad damage for less time. Now the way this affects revive potions is that it requires 2 revive potions in order to bring somebody up. So keep that in mind. Alright, with these notes in mind, we are ready to talk about how to make the most out of these dungeons. Alright, this is how much gold and experience you can get. It says EXO for some reason, but how much experience and gold you can get by tier. Now, it ranges whether you're running 1 hazard, 2 hazards, or 3 hazards, or if you're running them at tier 1 through 7. At the lowest, at 1 hazard, it's almost never worth your time, because even up to a tier 7, you're only getting 40% additional experience and gold. At a tier 2, you start to get to that 45% at a tier 5, but at tier 7 with 2 hazards, you're getting 65% experience. With 3 hazards on, now we can actually get to that 50%, well, it's actually 57% more gold and experience. Now, if you're trying to go back to the old ways of speed running these hazards, this is the most bang for your buck. That's a tier 4 3-hazard dungeon for 57% additional gold and experience. This means it'll be easier to run it this way. However, we're not just talking about ease. These hazards about challenge. But if you want over 100% more, then at tier 7 with 3 hazards, you will get 105% more gold and EXP. So, I think that this change was needed, and I'm glad that it's only affecting our hazard dungeons. There was a vocal minority that wanted for this change, and it might disincentivize some hazards over others, but we'll get into that upcoming. So, let's talk about our hazards in depth. When it comes to your weapons hazards, it's important to prepare your exos and your strategies. So, when you are loading up a weapons hazard dungeon, let other people in dungeon know so they can properly prepare. For example, if you're running a non-shield based, then you don't need Juggernaut. You'll never need Juggernaut for these weapon hazards. In fact, it might be better just to keep haste on for that regard. The best exos you can put on are Might, if you're running daggers or axes. Even random weapons will do well with Might. If you're going into your bows, pull back or far shot. Or sorry, shot distance. Yeah, far shot for your exos. I don't have it listed here, but it is very, very good. If you're going into random weapons or sword and shield, criticals might actually do you well so that you can make up for that middling damage you often get. Now, keep this in mind. When you are running these dungeons, as mentioned, you can check your weapon's damage, but the damage range, the percentage of the damage range you will get will get better with the percentages or with the tiers that you're running. So if you're running a tier 7 dungeon, your weapons will slightly scale. You won't be getting amazing weapons, mind you, but you can still get legendary weapons. And if you get a legendary fireball staff, lucky you. Let's talk about strategies for a moment. Obviously, with your daggers and your axes, it's pretty wise to keep at range, but with that fireball staff, as mentioned, you won't need to be using those power gems, but I recommend going into 3-shot bursts and kind of triangulating those blasts at enemies, and use the prongs of your fireball staff as sights. Now, archery is always going to be difficult. That is why using the far shot exo can help you if it's not something you're good at. Now, with those things in mind, you should be a little bit more prepared for those hazard dungeons. Now, some dungeons limit your resources, such as half potions, no revive, or no potions at all. We discussed those already, so let's talk about the best practices on how to survive. Just because you can't recover yourself with potions adequately doesn't mean you can't get health back. That's what our exos are for, such as stillness and vitality. And if you're running half effective potions, the exo unburdened might actually do you well, as it allows you to carry 4 potions. And as mentioned, it'll take you 2 revives to resurrect 1 person. Now, One of the other means by which you can survive in these dungeons is the Hodor tactic. That means instead of letting yourself get surrounded in a fight where you might get picked off and therefore be left on the floor until someone else can get to you, well, by leading the enemies to you and through a narrow gate, you can determine the pace of that battle, making it a bit easier to survive. Mind you, the unburdened EXO can only offer you 4 revives once you have it fully maxed out. For your boss fights, mini-boss and boss battles, the number of boss battles that you go through will increase based off of the tier that you run it in. So if you run mini bosses at a tier 1, you might only have a chance for 1 additional mini boss or 2 additional mini boss battles. But if you run at tier 7, you might even get 3, depending on the number of rooms in your dungeon. So, how do we prepare for trouble? That's right, we're going to bring potions, but not just any potions. The potions you want to bring are quad, invis, and bombs, as well as resurrection, but we're always bringing resurrection. Quad potions are the most important potions to bring when dealing with boss battles, as they will help you fly through those difficult challenges. In order to make these challenges just that much easier is communication. You need to, even if you think other people have eyes in their heads, you need to call out. If someone's fighting a doomer and a skeletal boss comes in, or an octoculus is flying in the air, call out the bosses that you see and the number of bosses that you see. It's also important to consider the priority of targets, so prioritize targets. Doomers can be left to their own devices. Their swarms that they summon can be a little annoying, but only that, just annoying. However, the Uber Mage summoning additional enemies consistently makes them a priority target. I would also recommend, if you get skeletal boss, that you double down, have at least 2 people fighting them at ranged. Now, here's the thing, when knowing your enemies, it's important to consider that your loadout is going to determine who is fighting who. Okay, your bow mains are obviously going to face down your ranged enemies, and if you are comfortable fighting the skeletal boss, then do so in melee, but it's not my recommendation. Also, don't panic. People are going to go down in this fight, and you might be the only one up. So, instead of worrying about thinking that the fight is over simply because you're the last one up, drop a haste potion, drop an invisibility potion, okay? And those are ways by which you can get your allies up. And haste is great because you can lure enemies away from the fight and then drop that haste and rush back to your allies. Now, you can also do this with teleport or blink. It's another amazing tactic for staying alive in these boss fights. Okay, so keep your head about you and work with your allies. Another bonus tip here is, assuming you're not the only person who has gone down or the only person up in the fight, I recommend taking a resurrection potion, opening it and holding it above your head when you plan on running to an ally to res, just in case you take a stray fireball from an octoculus or some other ranged blast that takes you out without your knowing. That way, when you die, the resurrection potion has a chance to break on you and bring you back up. So, one of my least favorite dungeons, but one of the best for gaining additional experience based off your performance, is going to be swarms. Now, here's the things you need to understand about the swarms. They are not all created equal. Some biomes are harder than others. Okay? In fact, all of them present an interesting challenge, but in my opinion, I think that the Vile Halls biome is the hardest biome to successfully run a swarms in because you get slimes and poisoned, meaning it slows you down, allowing those slimes that are extra quick and do extra damage at those tier 7s. But if you're smart and listening to Dayman, you're going to be rocking this at tier 4 anyways. But those faster slimes, they sneak underneath your toes and tickle you to death. So those two toe tickles do hurt. Now, it's very important to keep looking up and around. Now, here's another very difficult biome, and that is the lava forge, as you will be getting lost souls, very similar to the underworld. But the underworld, you're going to be dealing mostly with bats, but lost souls will spawn. And the tiny wasps that explode, the bombies as I call them, will be a lot more prevalent inside of the sandstorm biome as well. So, it's important to understand what biome you're going into. So you might want to reduce the effect of poisoning on your system if you're going into the vile halls. If you're going into underworld, sandstorm, or vile halls, or underworld, sandstorm, or the lava forge, it's important that you equip the blast exo, as those bombs are going to do a little bit less damage to you. Speaking of bombs, they are your absolute friend in these swarms. Dropping ice and explosive bombs are a phenomenal way of dealing with your grounded swarms. However, not all swarms are on the ground, such as medium wasps and bats. So get a good loadout. I recommend a spear, so as you can do some big swats. Longsword is also good for this as well. Now, when we're talking about how to stay alive, we need to watch each other's back and use the terrain at our advantage. Some swarms will not be able to reach you in other locations, so let them, all swarms can jump and all that, but if you have chains, go on those chains. If you have elevated terrain, strike from above. Keep in mind that you can lure bats into locations where they're a little easier to hit. Now, another thing too is be mindful of those bombs with your terrain. You fall a little bit faster than you run, so if you don't have haste on, dropping down will help you out. Let's talk about the next one upcoming, and that is additional damage. Now, nobody wants to be taking more damage than they ought to, but these are the sorts of hazards that you must take into consideration whether or not it's worth it. Okay? Consider the pairings with these, but we'll talk about that a bit later, but we'll talk about it a little bit now. But first, you need to think about how you're prepared. Bringing potions is I recommend all 6 potions you can bring. It might even be worth it to have someone with a healing staff on deck. Now, with your exos, these are great ways of mitigating damage. I almost would never recommend that you run a 200% damage when you're dealing with bombs, such as in the lava forge or with these prior swarms that we discussed. But the blast exo will allow you to stay up and rather than getting dropped by bombs, especially if you're running solo. So, running the blast exo is actually very good with the additional damage, as well as armor, as it'll allow you to take damage almost normally. But it's hard to let go of vitality, especially when damage is on the table. Now, we already did briefly discuss some of the pairings as such if you're dealing with the lava forge or explosive enemies. However, bosses are already going to be doing a lot of damage to you, So really consider that. It's not the worst option, but if you're already taking more damage, less effective potions as well as no res with additional damage is just asking for having the cuck simulator and just watching your friends have fun without you. For the few seconds that they'll stay alive without you, that is. Speaking of staying alive, let's talk about death. Now, here's the way death works. Death will be on your tail from the very first room. Okay? So, from the moment you walk through the door, death is going to be on you. So, how do we prepare for the inevitable? That is by utilizing invisibility and haste. That's right. While you are invisible, death cannot see you. So, what I like to do is have everyone craft at least 3 invisibility potions. This is another instance where the unburdened exo granting you 4 invisibility potions might actually be worth your while. Because if everyone has invisibility, you can stagger those invisibility potions as you run through the dungeons, and that will actually make it much easier to get away from death. He will be, mind you, if he has no one to target, he will teleport to your location. So, this is where it's nice to have a sacrificial lamb. Now, this is not fun to do this, but it is wise. And this is how you remove the challenge. If you're here for the challenges, then run the challenge the way you want. But by having a sacrificial lamb, you can have someone kind of sit back, and you don't have to take a bunch of deaths. You can just do Ring Around the Rosie and just run around death for a while. And if you're there for the social aspect, hey, take one for the team. Just talk to your friends while you have death chase you about. The other thing is, it is very important not to group up, okay? Staying 6 feet apart is more of a joke because of COVID, but actually creating space between you and your allies so death can't accidentally reap 2 of you at once. Another note about taking space is take turns picking up chests, okay? Because if everyone runs around a chest to pick it up, then you are just ripe for the picking. Now, the other thing is keep death on your radar. I can't stand when he goes into a wall and no one can see him. Man, is that scary. There was one time, 3 of us ended up going down because we were picking up a chest, and death came through the wall while we were picking up the chest and got all 3 of us. Oh, that was a good jump scare. Now, you can wait it out. Death will still disappear after 10 minutes. Okay, so just wait 10 minutes and death will be gone. But, mind you, there is no Aztec death whistle in these hazards, meaning there's no other way other than waiting him out to get rid of him. So, let's talk about the best pairings. Now, not all dungeons are created equal, and I'll give a few examples, but you can get creative on your own. I think that one of the easiest dungeons to run is daggers, half effective potions, and death. Okay? Because daggers are really good thrown weapons, meaning you can mitigate that half damage. It's interesting it says damage, but it's supposed to be half damage. Additional damage or half effective potions. Right? Because you're not going to be getting hit as much at range. And with death, he's really a non-factor if you're invisible, making it one of the easiest dungeon runs you can do. Mind you, you can also just eliminate death altogether. Very similar. Axes and bosses are good. Axes do slightly more damage than daggers, making them nice ranged options against bosses. And with half-effective potions, you still have a means of healing yourself. Now, when it comes to swarms, I try to give some credence to each of these types of so when it comes to swarms, I do like daggers to keep range, and because of those toe-tickling bastards and explosions, half-effective potions might be the way to go for those. Now, if you are running Fireball Staff, it can be fun. I actually think Fireball Staff has been a little bit fun. Fireball Staffs are just fine against bosses, right? And if you're keeping at range with a Fireball Staff, then additional damage won't actually bother you too much. Now those are the best pairings for ease. Not necessarily the best pairings for the most challenge. I think it's pretty obvious what the hardest dungeons would be. Additional bosses, 200% damage, no res. Or no potions with that. And I think swarms and bows are miserable together. Well, I hope you've learned something about our hazard dungeons, and especially how it pertains to the experience yield. I'll come back to this slide so you guys can look at it again. 1 hazard, 2 hazard, or 3 hazard, based around tier 1 through 7, the amount of experience and gold that you will acquire. And then remember, tier 4 with 3 hazards is the most bang for your buck in terms of being able to clear that dungeon quickly. Alright, until next time, disinfect your face mask and wash your face, baby. Peace.